So last year, I saw quite a lot of movies, and I reviewed quite a lot of movies, especially the big blockbusters. But there were still a lot of big blockbusters that I didn't get to talk about, and, other kinds of films that I had some thoughts on. So I thought, why not do a huge wrap-up video for all the films I saw in 2018 that I didn't get to talk about. And I'm going to go spoilers for some of these films and non-spoilers for others, especially smaller ones that some of you may not have seen yet. So before I talk about each film, one of these two labels will pop up. It'll be very obvious if I'm going spoilers or non-spoilers. There are time codes in the description, so you can skip around as you please. In the first part here, where I'm just doing some rapid-fire reviews, no spoilers here, but when I go in depth later on, look out for these labels. Now for the record, I still haven't seen all of these. I'm sorry, I've been busy. I can't see every movie. Now for the first part of this, I'm just going to quickly speed run through a bunch of films that I've either already reviewed on this channel, the links to those reviews are in the description, talked about in my top 10 movies of 2018 video and don't have much else to say about, or talked about on my podcast, subtle plug, and don't really have much else to say about it. Because hey, I don't want to be repeating myself, and we've still got a lot of other movies to talk about afterwards. And before we get into this, in case you don't know, here's how my rating system works. I feel like most people will just get this anyway, but some people ask about it, and there are going to be a lot of ratings in this video, so if you want, you can pause and read through this. Anyway, let's get to it. Black Panther, really great cast and world, with some of the superhero stuff being kind of generic. Avengers Infinity War. Almost everything I wanted it to be as a huge MCU fan. Great character interactions, incredibly well put together, emotional, has some amazing action, and when viewed with the rest of this universe is a mind-blowing cinematic achievement. Deadpool 2, really fun time that I haven't felt compelled to revisit. Solo, really good cast stuck in an incredibly average and not very compelling story that falls apart a bit in the third act. One of the most bland movies of the year in my opinion. Didn't love it, didn't hate it. Jurassic World 2. Much like Solo, really average, with some moments sticking out as particularly good, and some moments sticking out as just really, really stupid, even for a franchise that's gotten this ridiculous. Still has a great opening scene though. Incredibles 2. Super fun time that more or less lived up to my expectations, while not being as good as the first. Ant-Man and the Wasp. Pretty good, with some funny moments and an exciting finale, but nothing that exceptional. More of an average MCU film. Mission Impossible 6. Favorite movie of the year. Amazing action, characters, music, pacing, just everything. Venom. Really bad, with some fun moments towards the middle, with the whole Eddie and Venom dynamic. But the first act is pretty dull, and the last act is a big CGI mess, and really the film on the whole is a bizarre, confusing mess. Aquaman. Just insanely stupid and ridiculous, but it's done intentionally. It's very entertaining and a pretty fun time, even though some parts of it are terrible. 50 Shades Freed, just as terrible as you'd expect. Rampage, the dumbest movie of the year, and no, it's not good, but for the most part, it knows what it is, and you know what you're getting into when you're watching it. It's terrible, but that's what makes it fun. Watch it with some friends. Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again. Goes on for way too long and is predictable, but to be perfectly honest, I did enjoy most of it. No, it's not amazing, but it's pleasant and fun, and if you're just in the mood for something relaxing, with really no stakes and some decent musical numbers, yeah, check it out. Johnny English 3. Incredibly stupid, but kind of like Rampage. Hey, you know what you're getting into. A lot of the jokes do fall flat though. Skyscraper. Really bad, like worse than I was expecting, because it's not even that fun on like a Rampage level of it being the stupidest thing ever. It's just bad. Bad performances, a lot of bad effects, stupid finale, and a lot of it is just kinda dull. Its only saving graces are The Rock, who's super charismatic as always, and some okay action. It's probably a better film than Rampage, but I definitely enjoyed watching Rampage more. The Nun. Look, I didn't think it was that terrible. I thought the performances mostly weren't that bad, and it had a few good scares, although I do feel weird reviewing these kinds of horror films, because yes, it did scare me when there was a jump scare, which is what the film was supposed to do, but I wouldn't consider that great filmmaking. It's kinda lazy, so I'm a bit torn. I also personally just don't really like that kind of horror film. The finale is really stupid though, and not scary at all, and there are quite a few of those kinds of moments throughout the rest of the film as well. Tag. An okay comedy with a few really good laughs, and a lot of moments that are just, okay, that's not terrible. It's a bit of a mixed bag. I liked some scenes, like the Renner slow-mo stuff, but then some characters are kinda irritating, and some scenes don't make a lot of sense, and there's never that much of a comeuppance for Renner and his wife for being just horrible, horrible people. But hey, as far as comedies go, I had fun with it. Robin Hood, probably the worst film of 2018, but I absolutely love it. It's an amazing film to watch with friends. It's hilariously bad in almost every way. Jamie Foxx, who is a good actor, is unbelievably awful in it. Same goes for Ben Mendelsohn. It's stupid, predictable, filled with plot holes. I guess some action is alright, and Taron's fine, but overall, what a disaster. Still, holds a special place in my heart. Sorry to bother you, incredibly weird, but incredibly interesting, definitely worth checking out. Won't You Be My Neighbor? It's a beautiful documentary, and it'll make you feel good about humanity. That kind of almost rhymed. It wasn't meant to. Game Night. Really fun film that's well shot and much more creative than most standard comedies. It's a little bit like an Edgar Wright film. Isle of Dogs, great animation, and a somewhat flawed, but ultimately emotional and funny story. Searching. Funny, exciting, emotional, unpredictable, pretty much everything you'd want from a mystery like this. Also, it's done in a unique and creative way, especially for this genre. Black Klansman. One of the most entertaining films of the year. Funny, but also tense, with two incredible performances at the helm. Really think John David Washington should have been nominated. And also it's based off an amazing true story. Upgrade. Awesome action in an interesting world with a cool story. The Cloverfield Paradox, boring, underwhelming, nonsensical. As someone who really likes the other two films in this franchise, this was really disappointing. And First Man. I think it's a very well put together film. Everything on the technical side of things is pretty great, and the performances are mostly great too. But for me, it just really didn't stick with me or have any emotional impact on me, which is what I personally like the most about films, what they make me feel. And yeah, it's really well made, but it didn't make me feel much of anything, which is why I think I didn't love this as much as a lot of people, or as much as I was hoping I would, based on the team behind it. Alright, now with all of that out of the way, let's talk about some of the other big films of 2018 that I have some more to say about, and I'm realizing while recording this that this is going to be a very long video, so hope you're ready for that. First up, I guess we can start somewhat chronologically, even though that's not going to stay throughout the rest of this. Ready Player One. A lot of people seem to really love this film, and I can kind of understand that. I mean, it's a pretty fun time overall. There are just a lot of missed chances and opportunities in this, I feel, at least. And there are also just a lot of kind of dumb moments. But I mean, look, on the whole, I did enjoy it. I liked everyone in the cast, especially Mark Rylance. Well, everyone with the exception of TJ Miller. And I'm not just saying that because of the bad stuff he's done personally. Just in this movie, his character is incredibly annoying, and one of the least funny characters in any film from last year. I don't think I laughed at anything he said. But the rest of the cast, good all around. And overall, the film is competently made and mostly enjoyable. The main protagonists are mostly pretty likable, it has some exciting action scenes, it has some funny moments. I'm about to talk about the stuff that I didn't like, so I just want to make it clear first, I had a pretty good time with most of the film. Now, as far as the stuff that I didn't like, okay, this one might just be me, because most of the people I talked to about this film don't have a problem with this, but I really dislike the film's visual style on a few levels. One is the weird kind of CGI world that most of the film takes place in, but you know what? I can forgive that, because even though I don't really like it, it makes sense for the film. I mean, this is technically in a video game, the parts that are in the Oasis, so I get why it looks like a video game. But then just the color palette, it's all very dark and gray and just not that interesting to look at. I mean, that final battle, yes, it takes place in a dark gray world, but the characters coming into fight should be insanely colorful, or at least some of them in that giant horde, and that final showdown should have been so much more colorful. I get that some characters are dark and gray and have muted colors, but in these giant sweeping shots of all the characters, I don't think most of them should be, because that makes it just a lot less visually interesting than I think it could have been. I mean, you have all these characters that you got the rights to use, so use them. A lot of this just looks like the same gray characters crashing into each other, and that's part of what I mean when I say there were missed opportunities. With this premise, there is so much you can do with it, so many characters and worlds to use. I was just watching that final battle and I was thinking, this should be amazing and spectacular, but I'm not really that invested, or mind-blown, or as entertained as I would have thought I'd be. Sure, some of it was entertaining, but given the possibilities, I feel like it was a bit of a letdown. The film also didn't give me that sense of awe and wonder that you'd maybe hope for or expect from a Steven Spielberg film. Also, a lot of the film is just filled with dumb moments. And I'm not the kind of person who will tear down a movie because of little logical flaws in the story, but when those flaws are very obvious, and there are a lot of them, and the rest of the film isn't really that captivating, I notice it more and more. Just some examples that I remember off the top of my head: no one finding the first gate by driving backwards after several years, with this many people playing it and the clue being that obvious, and no one just doing it by accident. It's just insane. The villain kind of redemption at the end doesn't feel earned at all, and I know everyone's already made fun of it, but it's still hilarious to me, the way they try to act like this girl is super ugly because of that birthmark. There are also the times where the references aren't really clever, it's just characters saying names of things. Also, I'm not going to take points off the film for not totally following the book's plot. I understand why they couldn't do a lot of that, but I would just like to recommend that people read the Ready Player One book, because it's great, and in my opinion, a lot better than this film. So overall, I think Ready Player One is an okay film. It's not terrible, it's mostly pretty enjoyable, but it's a bit of a disappointment given the director and the premise that this came out as a bit of a nothing for me, when it could have been something truly spectacular. I'll give Ready Player One a 7 out of 10. Now, let's talk about A Quiet Place, a movie that surprised the hell out of me with how huge it became. I remember seeing the trailer for it and just thinking, hey, John Krasinski's still doing stuff after The Office. That's nice. I did not think it would be this big. But hey, good horror premise with good horror execution makes a lot of money. I mean, I suppose we can start with that. The premise is great. Not being able to make a sound in a horror movie is not only a good idea for a story, but also a great way to incorporate horror and jump scares. And actually, with this, I was impressed with the restraint on the jump scares. I mean, yes, there are quite a few, but I thought it was going to be way worse. There are more drawn-out, tense scenes in this that bring out the scariest parts. And that's definitely a kind of horror that I prefer to loud noise and sudden image flashing on the screen. The performances are also quite good. John Krasinski and Emily Blunt are of course great, and the child acting is actually really good for most of it. And because you care about this family and these characters, the emotional moments are pretty effective. The movie never made me cry, but when the emotional scenes were there, they work quite well, especially the big one towards the end. For a film with such a small budget, it also has really great visual effects. With the aliens, both their designs are quite cool, and they look really good CGI-wise. I also enjoyed the ending a lot, and yes, I do recognize that it's kind of a cliche, cheesy way to end a movie, with that badass shotgun reloading kind of thing.
And then she looks in the camera and says, "It's time to f***ing party."
But hey, I still thought it was cool. As far as the negatives, some scenes I felt were ruined by music, or maybe not ruined, but just worsened by it. I mean, it seems obvious to me that in this movie in particular, having no music at all leading up to the sound would be way more effective and way more terrifying. There are also some logical flaws in the plot, but that didn't really bother me while I was watching it. And maybe this is just because I'm not a horror movie guy, but this movie didn't completely blow my mind or anything, or have that much in it that I thought was truly exceptional, besides maybe the bathtub scene, which I felt was really well done. Most of it is very good, but unlike a lot of people, I wasn't completely blown away by it. Maybe that's because I didn't see it at the cinema, although to be perfectly honest, I think that would have been a way worse experience, with everyone making constant noise throughout. So all in all, I liked A Quiet Place a lot. It's exciting, tense, somewhat emotional. I think it's what you'd want out of a horror film like this. It didn't totally blow me away, but I liked it. I'll give it an 8.5 out of 10. Then let's talk about The Predator. The Predator was terrible. I know there's some people out there who really like it. That's totally fine, but for me, man, this was really disappointing. Because I love Shane Black. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang and The Nice Guys are two of my favorite films ever. And I'm one of those people who liked Iron Man 3, a lot. So I was really excited for this, and what a letdown. I mean, it's not like it doesn't have anything good. I liked some of the cast. Boyd Holbrook, Sterling K. Brown, and Keegan-Michael Key, I'd say probably are the best. Some of the action and the brutality of it was alright, and there were one or two scenes that I would say were genuinely good. But then, everything else. It really is like a downward spiral. It actually starts pretty decent and then keeps getting progressively worse and worse and worse. And then we get to the finale on the ship and in the forest and Key and Baxley shooting each other and Boyd Holbrook defeating the super predator all of a sudden, and it's just horrendous. The rest of the film also has some terrible effects in it. I'm looking at you, Predator dogs. The plot is just nonsense sometimes. And again, like I was talking about with Ready Player One, normally I don't really notice or mind plot holes that much in these big blockbusters while I'm actually watching the film. Pretty much every movie has them. A really good movie can make you forget about that stuff or not notice it. But throughout this, I kept noticing stuff, like, that doesn't add up, why doesn't he just do that? That character motivation doesn't make any sense and it's very contradictory. All that kind of stuff happens so often throughout this. The witty banter that happens throughout, which, because this is Shane Black, I thought would at least be kind of interesting, isn't good. I mean, one or two lines were funny, but most of it just falls flat. You don't care about any of these characters, most of the action is bland and forgettable. Man, I was disappointed by this. And the actual ending with the Predator human suit thing is just the cherry on top. Looks bad, stupid concept, just the worst thing that end of movie twist could have been. So yeah, overall, the new Predator wasn't great, to put it mildly. I mean, it certainly has a lot going on, I'll give it that, but most of it didn't work for me. I'll give The Predator a 3.5 out of 10. Then on to another film that I really disliked, Fantastic Beasts and the Crimes of Grindelwald. Here's the thing. I think this is definitely a better made film than The Predator, and it probably has more good things in it, but I think I might have enjoyed The Predator more. I'd definitely rather rewatch The Predator, because yeah, it's terrible, but at least stuff is happening and you can be amazed by how bad it is, and maybe even enjoy it sometimes. Here, this film was just nothing. Had some good stuff, had a ton of bad stuff, and overall just averaged out into a completely forgettable film. But unlike the first Fantastic Beasts, which I liked, but also thought was a bit bland and a bit forgettable, this one, in addition to that, also had quite a few terrible moments in it. Anyway, firstly, what I liked. If there's one thing in this movie that's amazing, it's Jude Law as Dumbledore. He perfectly captures the spirit of the character, more even from the books than from some of the films, especially for a younger version. He's whimsical and fun and kind and charismatic, but also clearly has a lot of dark stuff going on in his head, and Jude Law is great in the role. I also liked Eddie Redmayne and Dan Fogler as Newt and Kowalski and their dynamic again. Probably the most fun scenes in the film. And most of the other performances are okay, if not good. It's just the characters aren't really given that much interesting stuff to do. Or alternatively, what could be interesting for them is executed really poorly, which we'll get to. I'm talking about the new characters here, like Zoe Kravitz and Newt's brother, as well as Tina and Ezra Miller from the last film. Anyway, focus. These are supposed to be the positives. Most of the special effects look pretty fantastic, and the costumes and the rest of the technical aspects of the film are pretty good. There are some good scenes as well, like the horse carriage escape at the start. That was pretty spectacular. And look, I enjoyed the scene where we go back to Hogwarts and we hear the Harry Potter theme and all that, purely on a nostalgic level. Like yes, I loved these movies growing up, so this familiar imagery and music makes me smile. They didn't really do anything new or creative with it, it was just there. So I'm not saying it's great, but I feel like I should point it out, because again, it did make me smile. Also, I don't know if a lot of you know this, but I'm a huge Harry Potter fan. I've read the books and seen the movies dozens of times, and it was easily my favorite franchise when I was growing up, and I still love it to this day. Now, as far as the bad stuff. Firstly, performances. Alison Sudol, I don't know if I should blame her acting or the writing, but some combination of the two resulted in a really bad character, who I found mostly just annoying. And then Johnny Depp as Grindelwald, or Vald. Look, putting aside both alleged and confirmed stuff from his personal life, looking at this just as a performance, he's not a very compelling villain. He's nowhere near as intimidating or interesting or well acted as Voldemort was, and I really just wish they'd kept Colin Farrell, who was a pretty creepy villain in the first film. I also think the movie is really poorly paced, and it's one of those films where it feels like a lot of stuff was cut out. There are small plot points that start and go nowhere, or are never even brought up again, like Newt's assistant at the start, for example. But I mean, that's a very minor thing, I can forgive that. But then how all the other plot threads come together at the end is probably the worst way you could have done that kind of scene. I also don't think this mystery was very well set up. A lot of the build up to this whole reveal about Credence and the guy who's following them and Lestrange, I didn't find it very engaging. And for a decent part of the film, which is setting up this final scene, I was kinda bored, which surprised me for this world and this franchise. But I just wasn't really invested or interested in a lot of these characters. But the whole time I was thinking, hey, if this payoff is something really spectacular and really interesting, maybe it'll make all that build-up worth it. But no, it was so bad that it actually made me dislike the rest of the film even more. It's just all the major characters standing in a room yelling exposition at each other. It's one thing that the actual plot points they're yelling aren't very interesting or satisfying reveals. I honestly can't even really remember what the whole thing ended up being. But it's a whole other thing that it's done in the most bland and lazy way, where characters are just telling each other. Like, this is my origin story, and this happened in this place. And then another character comes in and goes, no, this is my origin story, and this happened to me in this place. And that goes on for what feels like 20 minutes. Just a huge letdown for what was already not that great of a build-up. And throughout the rest of the film, there's just so much stuff that either doesn't make sense or is just uninteresting. Or both. Queenie and Kowalski's relationship is the one that sticks out the most for me. Also, the epic twist ending with the whole Aurelius thing. At that point, I was already pretty unimpressed with the film, and it just made me roll my eyes and think, you really think that after this, I want to sit through another one of these? You're really going to give this huge sequel bait ending, because you want to make 5 more of these. Honestly, by the end of however many of these films they're going to make, I bet we're going to look back and say, yeah, those 5 movies could have easily been 2 movies. Look at that, this movie managed to make me, a huge Harry Potter fan, genuinely disinterested in this franchise going forward. Will I actually see the next one? I mean, I do have this YouTube channel and that podcast, so I kind of have to. So yes, I am 100% part of the problem, but if I didn't have all of that, I think there's a pretty good chance that I would just skip it. Overall, Fantastic Beasts 2 is quite a bit worse than the first one, which to me was pretty good, but also safe and bland and not super memorable. This one is also not very memorable, but has a bunch of bad stuff on top of it that the first film didn't have. It's easily my least favorite Harry Potter film, and I'll give it a 4.8 out of 10. Moving on finally to something good, 8th Grade. Now, not only is this film really great, but it's also directed by Bo Burnham, who I'm not really that familiar with. I think he was in The Big Sick. But apparently he started out on YouTube, which, as someone who wants to work in filmmaking in the future, is really cool. And the fact that he not only made a movie, but made a great movie is what's even cooler. Performance-wise, child performances are always a little risky, especially when they're the star of the film, because a lot of the time, kids, aren't great actors. And I mean, they're kids, so you don't want to be too harsh or anything, but it can definitely take a movie down a few levels. But in this, Elsie Fisher is fantastic, and this movie wouldn't work nearly as well as it does if she wasn't as good as she is. Another thing that elevates this is the writing. For the main character especially, her character is written like a really realistic 2018 teenager. And that's the thing about this film on the whole. There are a lot of movies out there where they try to capture what it's like to be a teenager these days, and what teens act like with their phones and their Snapchats and their Instagrams and everything, and usually comes across really fake and awkward and kind of cringeworthy. And this film feels like it was actually made by a person who knows what young people are like these days, and how people act with their phones, and how teens interact with each other, and I don't know, that was just really refreshing. And as someone who started making videos when I was really young, I think younger than the main girl in this film is, and having known people who've done the same, it makes me appreciate how accurate and how real the main girl's YouTube video making process is, and how really awkward she is, and all that just added a whole other layer to both the film and the character for me. The middle school itself also, with the kids shouting out outdated memes and all that sort of stuff, I just liked how, I don't know, more authentic and made by a real human being this film felt. The movie's also very funny and really emotional. A few scenes, especially one towards the end involving her dad, that made me tear up a bit. And just scenes of Kayla interacting with people at school and the older kids and seeing how excited she gets when someone actually talks to her. It's just so sweet and heartwarming, and works as well as it does because of how this character is written and acted. And the ending, yeah, I won't spoil it, but it's also emotional. I'd say my only complaints really are some of this stuff I feel like I've seen before. Like, a lot of it reminded me of Edge of 17, which is a film that I love. And look, I'll admit, I haven't seen a ton of movies in this genre, so I'm sure Edge of 17 didn't invent this kind of formula. But even having only seen that, I was like, alright, that's gonna happen and that's gonna happen. And there were quite a few very specific moments where I was like, that's almost exactly like what happens in that film. I'm not saying they intentionally copied that movie. It could be parallel thinking, and hey, in this genre, there are going to be some tropes that almost all the films follow, but it was a little distracting, and some of the film was a bit predictable. Overall, 8th Grade is just sweet and funny and well written and well acted. It's great. You really should go watch it. I'll give it a 9.3 out of 10. Next, onto one of the bigger surprises of the year for me, Teen Titans Go to the Movies. Based on the trailer I saw for this, I thought this film was going to be absolutely terrible. Or at the very least, not my kind of thing at all. I've never watched the original Teen Titans show or this new one, but people who have watched this new one have told me it's not very good. So I went into this with really low expectations. And what a surprise! It was actually kind of good. It's not amazing or anything, but it's way better than I was expecting it to be. The thing that I really wasn't expecting was that this film actually made me laugh. I guess they put the worst jokes in that trailer because some of the jokes in here were kind of funny. It's kind of in a SpongeBob sort of way, where it just gets so ridiculous and stupid and absurd that it's kind of funny. And some of the humor is just kind of reference to a superhero thing, but as a fan of many superhero things, I thought some of those jokes were pretty funny too. Not every joke is a winner. There are those jokes in the trailer that are just not my kind of humor, let's say. But I mean, sometimes they also do almost acknowledge that those jokes are really childish and lame, and that's why no one takes these guys seriously in the film. But yeah, that doesn't make up for the fact that there are still quite a few really bad jokes in here, which is a shame, since most of it wasn't that bad. That's all I've got to say, really. I mean, there's not much to say in terms of plot or characters. It's a standard, pretty predictable kids movie kind of plot, but it's mostly focused on the humor, and that was actually pretty decent for the most part. Voice acting's pretty solid, animation's nothing amazing, but not bad either. You know, most of it's pretty alright. I'd say give it a watch if you're vaguely interested. It's pretty fun, and the bad parts are spaced out enough throughout the film that it remains entertaining. I'll give it a 7.4 out of 10. Also has a great and really funny Stan Lee cameo. Next is The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, the new Netflix film from the Coen brothers. I want to establish something real quick that I don't think I've ever mentioned on this channel before. I love westerns, and all the western tropes. I love the scenery, and the music, and the costumes, and the gunfights, and the horse riding, and I don't know, just everything that you can think of with a western. So when I heard about this, a western anthology by the Coen brothers with 6 stories that I could watch pretty much immediately for free on Netflix, yeah, how was I going to turn that down? And in the end, it was pretty good. For me, it was a little bit of a mixed bag. Some of it was amazing, and some of it was a bit meh. I guess we can go through all the stories one by one. The first one, the one actually about Buster Scruggs, I absolutely loved. I mean, it's a kind of cartoonish take on all those western tropes that I love. It's fast-paced and exciting and funny and just a really good time. I loved it. Then the second one, the James Franco one, I also loved. It was also fun and had some great imagery. At this point I was thinking, this could be one of my favorite films of the year if it keeps going like this. Then the third one happened, the Liam Neeson, Dudley Dursley one. And that one, I didn't like as much. I really appreciated it after watching it, especially because of the ending, which left me thinking and really stuck with me for quite a while. But the content of the whole thing itself, I felt dragged on a bit too long, and I actually found myself bored while watching it. Like, yes, the performance is really good from Harry Melling, but I think making the audience sit through that rather long performance several times over in real time, or at least partly in real time, hurt this story's pacing, because I get you want to show how the audience reaction is changing, and you gotta give it some time to build up naturally, but cutting a little of that down, I think would have done this some favors, because much like that final audience, I really wasn't that interested at that point, and was kinda looking at my watch, which I suppose might have been the point, but if the point was to bore me, then yeah, I'm still not really that big of a fan of it. Still had some good moments though, and a great, very depressing ending. The fourth story was the guy looking for gold, some beautiful imagery, and a pretty okay story overall. Didn't blow me away or anything, but it was pretty solid. Then the fifth one with the woman on the trail, I won't spoil any of it, but I loved it. Had some genuine emotion to it, and an incredible action sequence, and some great characters. Exactly what you'd want from this kind of thing. And then the last one, I wasn't a big fan of. The thing is, you can have characters just talking for quite a long time and have it be interesting, even if it's not anything super consequential to the story they're talking about. You can have that be engaging and have some character development in there. I think the most obvious example is Tarantino. The pub scene from *Inglourious Basterds* always comes to my mind. Or, a more direct comparison, the big section of The Hateful Eight that just takes place in that horse carriage, and is almost entirely just characters talking. And that is very entertaining because of the actors and the writing. And this just wasn't that. It wasn't terrible, but the dialogue just wasn't as interesting as, well, those other examples that I just gave. And again, it felt like a little bit of a drag to get through. There are some good performances and a few great moments, for example, the ending, but overall, probably my least favorite of the six. And it's a shame it ended on that, because that finished it on kind of a low note for me. But hey, overall, there's not a single one of these that I'd call bad. At best, they were amazing, and at worst, they were a little dull and underwhelming. I'd still recommend this, especially for those who love westerns. And hey, it's on Netflix right now, so it's not going to cost you anything if you already have that. I'll give The Ballad of Buster Scruggs an 8.4 out of 10. Now, for a little bit, let's talk about some of the Best Picture Oscar nominees, starting with Roma. Roma is amazing, and it's a film I'm not really going to be spoiling, because you should watch it for yourself. I mean, like Buster Scruggs, it's on Netflix right now. Roma is a very depressing film in a lot of ways, and also a little uplifting in some other ways. It reminded me a lot of Manchester by the Sea in that regard. The film is very well shot and very well acted, especially the main performance from Yalitza Aparicio, who definitely deserves that Best Actress nomination. But what stuck with me most about this film is how personal it feels. This is all based off of the childhood of the director Alfonso Cuarón, but told from the perspective of the maid that his family had when he was younger. And it really feels like one person's vision and one person's look into the past. You can tell that there's a lot of passion behind this. It's one of those kinds of films that has less of a very structured plot, really, and is more following this character through her life. And it works very well in that way, because you care deeply about this character. Partly because of the writing, and partly because of the performance. And because of the investment in that main character and her journey, it's a very emotional film. Like I said, super depressing at many points, but also has some moments of joy that shine through. Also, I know I mentioned how well shot the film is earlier in passing, but I gotta reiterate, it's fantastically shot. There's the sequence on the beach that is phenomenal and terrifying, and it's excellently executed. The only negative I have really is that there were a few moments that got really cheesy all of a sudden for something that's mostly very realistic. Really, there's only one moment. And yes, I know this is based on the maid's real life, and so maybe this happened, and then this complaint is retracted. But I seriously doubt this happened, because it's very much like a big movie moment that seemed way too coincidental to actually have happened. For those who've seen it who are wondering, it's a part involving someone holding a gun, and that's all I'll say. All in all though, Roma is a beautiful film. It definitely deserves all of the awards it's been getting. It really stuck with me for a while after I watched it, and there's something that's really added to the experience of it by how deeply personal it feels. I'll give it a 9.5 out of 10. Now, let's talk about the favorite, and here again, minor spoilers. If you haven't seen it and you're going to, I'd say probably skip this one, since I'll be talking about the directions some of the characters go. The favorite is a weird film, to say the least, but I liked it quite a lot. I went into this with very little idea of what it was. I thought it was going to be a comedy, and it is, in a way. It's a comedy drama, and it's kind of a hard film to describe. I'd say performance-wise, this is easily one of the best films of the year. There isn't a single performance in this that isn't amazing. Among the main three, there isn't really a standout for me, because they're all great in different ways. I also absolutely loved how the film was shot, the fisheye lens used sometimes, and the way the camera moves with certain characters. It makes every scene really engaging and interesting to watch. And it's able to give some more subtle character development and storytelling visually. Also the set design, the makeup, the costumes, everything about this film looks amazing. The characters are also very interesting, and I did kind of enjoy how there isn't really a good person in this movie. I mean, in some respect, and to different degrees, all of these characters do some bad things. But then they all develop throughout, and information is revealed that makes you feel a different way about pretty much all of them. And by the end, I'd felt several different kinds of emotions towards each of these main characters. It's really well done. For the negatives, I think really the only thing I didn't like is that I didn't find some of it that funny, like parts that were definitely meant to be funny. Quite a few of the jokes did land, but towards the start especially, there were a few where it was clear that it was meant to be a joke, and it just didn't work for me. Besides that though, The Favorite is really fantastic, and definitely deserves to be nominated for Best Picture. The thing is, with this film, I'd say it's definitely one of the best films of the year, but I don't know if it's one of my personal favorites. And no, that terrible pun was not intended. That's why when I make my top 10 list, Mission Impossible 6 is still going to be higher than this, even though this is probably a better made film, because Mission Impossible 6 is what I subjectively enjoyed the most. While this will probably be on my top 10 as well, it's not my absolute favorite cinema experience of the year. I don't know how often I'd go back to this compared to other films, and that's where more subjectivity comes in. I know this is a bit of a tangent, but I kind of want to point out the difference between what I think are the best and most well-made films and my favorite films. It's a giant topic that one day I could and probably will make a video on. But for right now, The Favorite is both very well made, and I did also enjoy watching it. Don't get that confused because of that tangent. I did also really like this film. That's something I should also definitely mention. The vast majority of the time, there is a big crossover in the categories of well-made films and films I enjoy watching. It's just more in the smaller differences in the lists and ratings where that starts to play more of a role. Anyway, I'm starting to go back to that tangent now. Let's move on. I'll give The Favorite a 9.4 out of 10. Now, onto one of the more controversial films of last year, Bohemian Rhapsody. Most of this controversy has come from the director, Bryan Singer's sexual assault allegations, and I think this is a good chance to talk about this in general, because just looking at this from a review perspective, this is kind of a difficult situation when talking about these films, because these allegations come out against these directors and actors, and I'm not really sure how to handle it in my review. The example I'd use is Kevin Spacey in Baby Driver, maybe my favorite film. I think he gives a good performance, and I think most people would agree he was a good actor. But it's just weird and uncomfortable to say that, given what's come to light about him. So generally speaking, I'd just try to avoid it. Just not talk about those people specifically. And in this case, it's an entirely separate conversation of whether the Oscars should nominate this film for Best Picture, especially considering how the Time's Up and Me Too movement are a very big part of the ceremony. That's a discussion for another day. With just reviewing this film, I feel like it's a discredit to the hundreds and hundreds of other people who worked on it to totally disregard it because the director is allegedly a very bad person, including a discredit to the director who took over this film once Singer left. The reason I'm saying all this is that I want to talk about this movie just as a movie, but I also don't want to ignore the Singer situation and have people think that me giving this film a pretty positive review is some kind of endorsement or acceptance of Singer and the stuff he's done. It's not. That should be obvious, but I feel like some people might still think that if I didn't say this. So, this is just me talking about the film as a film. As a film, I thought Bohemian Rhapsody was pretty good. I don't think it's Best Picture worthy, but I did enjoy watching it. There are two things that I feel really carry this film. First and foremost, the music. That's kind of a given with this sort of film, but I've loved a lot of Queen songs for a while, so I enjoyed them in this. The second thing is the main performance from Rami Malek, who is really fantastic as Freddie Mercury. He has the charisma and the cadence of his voice and the energy. I thought he was great. And the rest of the performances, namely the other band members, pretty good all around. I think most of the rest of the film is good, but nothing really blew me away, in terms of like cinematography or production design or anything. I mean, it's well done, but I just don't think it's Best Picture caliber. A lot of it is kind of standard. I did enjoy that final Live Aid scene though. I think that was easily the most memorable part of the film. As far as the negatives, besides some of it being pretty standard, let's real quick talk about historical inaccuracies. I feel like there was a lot of that going on here. And there's a whole debate about that. I actually just did a presentation in school about the ethics of altering facts in historical films. You can look at it from the perspective of what this film's screenwriter said, which is that they're making a movie and not a documentary, although I guess documentaries are movies. That's not the point. But then you can also look at it as kind of insulting to the memory of Freddie Mercury, if they fictionalize this and pass it off as reality. So really, if this was about a totally fictional band, I would watch it and go, alright, that was kind of predictable and formulaic, how they all have that falling out and then they get back together for one last show after Freddie tells them about his disease. Still an enjoyable film, but very much structured like these films usually are. But the thing is, this is based off real life, and real life often isn't structured like that. And looking it up afterwards, yeah, a lot of this didn't happen the way it did in the film, or in the order it did in the film. And for me personally, I don't know, that's still a bit of a gray area in my mind. but I do lean towards the idea that unless it's done in an incredibly, ridiculously disrespectful way, they are making a film here, and generally, I don't think you should watch non-documentary films to get an accurate historical insight, because pretty much every film based off true events has some kind of exaggeration or rearrangement of the facts to make it work as a film. Even with that though, there are some moments in here that, in addition to not having happened that way in real life, just from a film perspective, are kind of cheesy and I thought poorly executed, and there's some weird editing. Overall, I thought Bohemian Rhapsody was quite entertaining. It has some pretty great performances, obviously good music, and I had fun with it. It does have flaws, and if you're looking at it from a historically accurate perspective, it has a lot of flaws, but just as a film, I enjoyed it. I'll give Bohemian Rhapsody a 7.9 out of 10. Then, on to another Best Picture nominee, A Star is Born. I feel like this is another somewhat divisive Best Picture nominee, at least in my personal life, because about half the people I know who've seen it said they loved it, and the other half said it's super overrated and stupid and corny. And sorry to all of those people, but I definitely fall towards the former. I like this movie a lot. As far as the cast goes, you expect that Bradley Cooper and Sam Elliott are going to be great, and they are, but Lady Gaga is equally fantastic here, and I had no idea she was a great actress. I discovered afterwards that she's been in stuff before that I haven't seen, but yeah, I was very surprised by the fact that she not only can act, but she's great at it, and she gives a performance that's really worthy of being nominated for all of these awards. Also, Dave Chappelle shows up at one point, and he's really good as well. A lot of the movie working obviously depends on Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper's chemistry, and it's genuinely amazing here. I can understand when people say some of their scenes together are cheesy, but personally, I found the relationship really believable, and that makes some of the more tragic emotional moments with them all the more heartbreaking, especially the big one at the end. Honestly though, for me personally, I found the Bradley Cooper and Sam Elliott moment in the car to be the most emotional part of the film. The writing and Elliott's performance, it very nearly made me tear up. The other big part of this film is of course the music, which I liked. That being said, I haven't gone back and listened to the soundtrack since I saw the film, and the only song I really remember is Shallow, just because it's in all the promo stuff, and it's on the radio, and it's kind of impossible to avoid. But that doesn't mean the songs are bad at all. I guess it's just not really my kind of music. Although some of you may know, my kind of music is kind of all over the place. But overall, a good soundtrack that I personally didn't find super memorable. Also, as much as I enjoyed the story, there were quite a few times where you kind of know where it's going, and that's not because it's a remake, because I haven't seen the previous versions of this film, and I could still see where the story was going. That being said, it's not that big of a problem. It's not so bad that it ruins the entire experience or anything, but the film is a bit predictable at quite a few points. All in all, A Star is Born is great, and it gave me more respect for Bradley Cooper, because before this, I thought he was a fantastic actor, but now he's also shown himself to be a talented director. He also co-produced and co-wrote this film, so a lot of credit to him here. Great performances, well-directed, and emotional. I'll give it a 9.2 out of 10. Now, on to another Best Picture nominee, a very interesting one, Vice. I was really excited for Vice because I loved The Big Short, which showed that Adam McKay isn't just a director of goofy comedies, but can also make awards contenders. And so, after I finally saw Vice, I liked it a lot, but there was a lot about it that I didn't like a lot. And let me just say up front, I'm not going to be talking about how accurate this film is to real life. It's kind of like what I talked about with Bohemian Rhapsody. I'm bringing it up here again because this is a very political film and the people involved are very much still around, and I've seen some articles talking about how it's terrible because of how historically inaccurate it is, and so I'm just saying now, I'm looking at this just from a film perspective, because I don't feel like I know enough about the real life situation to make proper judgments there, and again, the whole thing about historical films having inaccuracies, just go back to that part if you want. So, Vice, as a movie, let's go. Easily the strongest point of this film is the acting. Christian Bale should probably win the Oscar for this, and now recording this part of the video after the Oscars, he didn't. Oh well. I mean, you know Christian Bale's gonna be great, and he is here. Not just because of the makeup and the transformation and all that, but you really just see the character, or the person, I guess, of Dick Cheney. Amy Adams and Steve Carell are great as you'd expect, and the standout for me was Sam Rockwell as George Bush. Maybe just because George Bush is the only one I've actually seen footage of out of the main cast, so I could appreciate how much like George Bush he both looks and talks. Again, I know I said I'm not judging this on historical accuracy, that's in regards to the events and actions of characters, just in getting the cadence of his voice and his mannerisms and all that, this is an amazing performance. And again, what do you expect? Sam Rockwell is always fantastic. The other thing I liked a lot about this film kind of leads into the negatives as well, and that's the style and the editing, and I had heard a lot about this film's editing before going in, and now having seen the film, it's a bit of a mixed bag. On the one hand, the style of the film keeps it very entertaining. It's a lot like The Big Short in that way. It's a very unconventional way of making a true story biopic kind of film, and I like that. I thought it was interesting, and it led to some really funny moments, like halfway through when the movie fake ends. That was one of my favorite parts. And there's other stuff where they blur the faces and bleep out the names of certain people, and, it's a kind of unique way of conveying certain information that otherwise could have been just done in a pretty bland way. That being said, on the other hand, sometimes the style doesn't work very well, and the film feels really cheap and kind of unfinished at points due to the editing. And I get that that's the style the film is going for, but it's not a particularly good style, at least at these certain points. There are the parts where it fades to black, or cuts to nature footage, or people are cut off in the middle of sentences, and there are freeze frames and zooms, and again, it gives this kind of amateur feeling to parts of the film. I know Adam McKay is talented, but I just don't think these parts came out the way he imagined, or had the effect he was hoping for. The example that everyone talks about is that George W. Bush scene, because that clip was released. But I mean, there are some bad parts in there, like when it stops and cuts to the fishing hook and all that. It's like, yes, I get it, he's taking the bait, it's just a weird way of doing it that distracts from the rest of the scene. And it's not even that original of an idea. Other films do this kind of thing where they cut to nature footage, and usually I'm not really a fan of it there either. And on that note, something else I didn't really like is there are quite a few times where the dialogue isn't subtle at all, and information is repeated that either we've already heard or has been told visually, and I'm sitting there thinking, no, I got it. You don't have to repeat it in a more obvious way. And I know Adam McKay did that in The Big Short, where it was about this incredibly complicated and confusing thing. And yes, this is still a very complicated situation, but it didn't require the level of dumbing down that some points of the film get to. And I felt at some points they kept communicating stuff in kind of a lazy way that, again, wasn't even really necessary, because the film had already presented that previously in a better way. So I'm not really sure why they kept some of those in. I know I'm saying a lot about the negatives here. This isn't the entire film. It's just a few points where it really stands out. So overall, I can't say I didn't enjoy watching Vice. It's a very entertaining and different kind of biopic. The style of the film is what makes it so engaging, but also what leads to some parts of it feeling kind of cheap and amateurish. I think it's worth checking out for the performances, and it's certainly not a boring film. But it also isn't a perfect one, and I'd say isn't as good as The Big Short. I'll give Vice an 8 out of 10. Then there's Bad Times at the El Royale, which despite the not amazing response it got, I was incredibly excited for. Not only is the cast great, but Drew Goddard is really talented and has worked on some amazing stuff, like Daredevil, Cloverfield, The Martian, and Cabin in the Woods, just to name a few. And this movie very nearly lived up to my expectations. I would say about 80% of it was just as great as I was hoping it would be, and then 20%, the majority of it at the end of the film, kind of fell a bit flat for me. Performance-wise, this is top-notch all around. I like John Hamm in pretty much everything he's in, Jeff Bridges is awesome, so is Dakota Johnson, and I don't think I've ever seen Cynthia Erivo or Lewis Pullman in anything before this, and they're both amazing. Looking forward to seeing them in a lot more stuff now going forward. To be perfectly honest, the only performance I wasn't crazy about, and this shocked me, was Chris Hemsworth. And he's not bad, I just think he's miscast, and the writing's not great for this character. Despite all the crazy stuff he does and everything, I don't think I was ever once intimidated by his character. And I don't think that's just because I'm so used to seeing him as Thor that I can't buy him in another role, because he's a great actor, and I've seen him in other stuff before where it totally works. It's just, he doesn't give off the terrifying kind of maniac cult leader vibe that he's supposed to. I was just like, alright, that's a bad guy, and he might kill someone, but I'm not scared of him at all. I'm not saying they should have gotten Javier Bardem for this, but I'm just saying, as an example of where that terrifying presence is there, look at No Country for Old Men. Every time he was in a scene, I was on the edge of my seat, and that kind of tense feeling just wasn't really here with the Chris Hemsworth character. Additionally, the writing for that character isn't great. It feels very much like leftover writing for a crazy villain like the Joker, or something in that style. Like the philosophical talks he has, and the games involving death he plays, and the kind of weird stuff he does, like the dance and everything. It all just felt like Chris Hemsworth saying crazy villain dialogue, and not actually like the character himself being there, if you get what I mean. I just didn't really buy it. That's a lot of not so positive stuff I've said there. I still loved most of this film. The way the mysteries weave throughout this film, with different plot lines coming together, it's expertly done for almost all of it. And there were really surprising moments. For a lot of it, it was super tense, and you didn't know what was going to happen next, and I love that. I love in films when you can tell that something's kind of off, and then it keeps building and building and building until it reaches this crazy conclusion and answers all the mysteries. It also does a good job of mixing tension with humor. It never killed the tension with a joke. Most of the characters are also pretty fantastic, namely Flynn and Darlene. The film does a really good job of making you care about almost all of these characters. The film also looks absolutely gorgeous, from the colors to the cinematography. It's one of the best looking movies of the year, and it also has some excellent visual storytelling. It also has an almost Guardians of the Galaxy level awesome soundtrack. I do have a few other complaints besides the Chris Hemsworth character, and that mainly concerns the third act where it falls apart a bit. I won't spoil anything, but up until now, all the character revelations and reveals had been interesting and satisfying, and then there's one involving a certain character at the end that's just kind of too ridiculous, even for a film that is a little bit ridiculous. And I think on the whole, it maybe had one too many plot lines going on. Like, I understand it wouldn't have been easy to change. You can't just take one out because they're all so interconnected. But by the end, when everything was being explained, it was like, and then in addition to all that craziness, then this thing happened. And it started to feel a little cluttered. Up till that point though, I felt it was really well balanced. Also, that ending, once all the mystery answers are revealed, does make you think about some of the other parts of the film and go, well, if those things are totally unrelated, that's a bit of a crazy coincidence, isn't it? But hey, it's a movie, coincidences happen. That's not a huge deal for me. Overall, Bad Times at the El Royale might have been in my top 10 of the year if I'd seen it when I made that video. Besides a bit of a sloppier third act, most of it is incredibly engaging and well written, with great characters, visuals, and music. I'll give it an 8.9 out of 10. Up next, let's talk about Blindspotting. Blindspotting is a pretty small film that I'd heard about so much on Twitter that I eventually thought, alright, if it's really this good, I gotta give it a watch. And I'm happy I did. This review I'm gonna keep a bit shorter, because I just want people to go and watch this like I did, with no real idea of what it is. Just experience this amazing film. It's a comedy drama, and it not only succeeds, but excels at being both. This is one of the funniest films of the year, and most of that comes from the chemistry between the two leads, David Diggs and Rafael Casal, who 100% need to be in more stuff. The film deals with race and identity in a fascinating way, it has emotional moments, and genuinely some of the most tense scenes of the year. The only thing I could say I didn't love was the ending, which I didn't even dislike. It just felt a little more heightened in terms of reality than the rest of the film, which granted does take place in a little bit of a heightened reality sometimes. But, I don't know, for something that's mostly set in a pretty realistic world, it broke that a tiny bit too much at the end for me. Still though, a phenomenal film that you should 100% check out, probably my top 3 of the year now. I'll give Blindspotting a 9.8 out of 10. Then the film that I've gotten tons of requests to talk about, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I mean, what do you want me to say? It's amazing. I honestly can't really remember disliking anything in this film. Like I said, amazing. I mean, seriously, I don't know what's with Sony. Both live action and animated, they make some of the best films and some of the worst. Anyway, Spider-Verse. I love the animation style of this film, the way it looks like a comic book and like a 2D, 3D hybrid of animation, and almost like motion capture at a few points. It's incredibly unique. It's a style I've never really seen before, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Not only that, but also the actual visuals, the color, the details in the background. It's just a film where it seems like so much effort and so much hard work was sunk into it. Voice acting wise, this is all stellar. The highlight for me has to be Jake Johnson, but everyone does a good job here. It's also one of the funniest films of the year. It had me laughing out loud quite a few times, and not just from like, hey look, it's a reference to a superhero thing, which don't get me wrong, can also get some really good laughs if executed well. But just generally, especially the interactions between the different spider beings, were hilarious. I think my personal favorite, comedy-wise, has gotta be Nick Cage. The action scenes are really cool, again, fantastic use of animation, the film has stakes and threatening villains, not only that Kingpin murder at the start, but also the Prowler. His music and the use of animation in those scenes made him genuinely terrifying. It's got a lot of heart as well. The Peter Parker, Mary Jane stuff was nice, but personally, I found the storyline with Miles and his dad the most compelling, emotion-wise. I mean, come on, that scene with them on the two sides of the door, that's gotta get you just a little bit. I don't think there's much else to say. It's fantastic. It's funny and charming and heartfelt and can be enjoyed by pretty much everyone, of all ages. It's a bit like The Incredibles in that sense, where I feel like it's a film you could show anyone and they'd have a hard time not enjoying it on some level. I know some people are going to be upset that I don't give this a 10 out of 10. I mean, it isn't absolutely perfect. There were a few music choices that I felt were a little odd, and maybe one or two jokes didn't land, but still, these are pretty minor nitpicks. Is it my favorite Spider-Man film? That's tough, because I really love Homecoming, and even on a bit of a more personal level, which makes it really hard to beat, they're at the very least very close in my mind. I'll give Into the Spider-Verse a 9.6 out of 10, and also I'm really looking forward to seeing more films from this series. Now let's talk about another film I really loved, Creed 2. Creed is easily one of my favorite films, top 10 definitely. No, I haven't seen the other Rocky films besides the first one, but that's something else that's great about it. You can still really appreciate it as a film, even if you only have a very basic knowledge of the other Rocky films. So, I was super hyped for this, and while it's not better than the first, it pretty much lived up to my expectations. Michael B. Jordan is just as great as he was in the first film, Sylvester Stallone is fantastic again, and I love their friendship, one of my favorite parts of these two films. Tessa Thompson is mostly really good again, and I like the new directions this film took Adonis and Bianca's relationship, and how it developed it. It's really believable and sweet, for the most part. We'll get to that a little later. Also, on Michael B. Jordan real quick, I know this is probably part of the job, but he clearly learned how to at least partially box. There's a shot in one of the training montages that goes for like 30 seconds, and he clearly knows what he's doing. And I don't know, that kind of commitment to the role just impresses me. Two performances that really surprised me in this were Dolph Lundgren and Florian Montianu as the kind of villains. I mean, I haven't seen Rocky IV, so I'm sure if you have, there is a bit more of an emotional impact there, with Ivan Drago as a character, but as far as this film on its own, I thought he was good. Yeah, the acting gets a bit over the top sometimes, but this movie is a bit over the top sometimes, and it worked. And his son, didn't get a ton of acting to do, but when he did, he was better than I expected for someone who's an athlete and not really a professional actor, at least not before this. And honestly, as far as antagonists go, I think this is an area where this film is better than the first Creed, because not only was Victor terrifying in the ring, but they were actually kind of likable and interesting when you add in that whole Russian national pride aspect and Drago's wife and everything. By the final fight, yeah, I was rooting for Adonis, but I was also almost kind of rooting for Victor too. And when Ivan and Victor got their kind of happy ending together, that really stood out to me as an interesting direction to take this, where they could have just been cartoonishly evil. Also, just want to mention, I have no idea why this scene was cut from the film. I won't spoil it, but you should definitely watch it. Just look up Creed 2 deleted scene, it should be there. It's really well done and emotional and adds even more to the characters, and again, no idea why this was cut. If you like this film, definitely check it out. As far as frightening in the ring though, they did a good job of making it look like those punches from Drago were very painful. Now, this film is definitely slower paced than the first film, and while personally I think the pacing of that first film is better, I don't think the slow pace is a big detriment here. It really gives the film's story and character development time to breathe, so it doesn't feel rushed or forced. It gives time for Adonis' arc to develop naturally, and it makes the ending, when it all comes together, all the more satisfying. That we've waited for it and gotten even more invested in these characters. And also, the emotional moments, for the most part, work really well. Everything with Adonis and Rocky, and when Adonis and Bianca find out their child is deaf, it's done well, and it's effective. Also, the slower pace and build-up of it all allows the film to actually have it make sense, character-wise, for Creed to fight Drago again. Because if you're looking at this realistically, he shouldn't do it. But the film has to end with another epic Creed-Drago fight, and so I was wondering how they would make that make logical sense. That his mom and Bianca and Rocky would support him taking that fight again. And because of not only the writing, but also the slower pace, it totally makes sense and works. And that it's all about doing it for the right reasons and proving something to yourself and doing what you love and all that, it's great.
I just came here to tell you that I did it. But I didn't do it for you. But because of them, I did it. Because it was my fight.
And then, as far as the actual boxing stuff in it, I really didn't think this film could capture the same kind of emotional adrenaline rush feeling that the first Creed's finale gave me. That finale is one of the few times I can remember actually wanting to cheer in the cinema, which, just for the record, I didn't, but I kinda wanted to because I was so hyped up. But, to my surprise, this film actually did capture that. I don't know if it's quite on the same level, or if it even can be for me at this point, because I've seen that first film so many times, but the final training montage and fight in this film are spectacular. The boxing scenes in general are very well made, but that finale, man, it was so good. After all this character build-up and his training and his growth and having Rocky in his corner, to see Adonis finally get some punches in, it's just such a satisfying ending. And then, the moment where he actually knocks down Drago and the Rocky theme kicks in, that is one of my favorite movie moments of 2018.
Drago's on his heels.
It's up there with Thor entering Wakanda in Infinity War, as far as just awesome, making me smile from ear to ear kind of moments. Also, love the song in that training montage. I also think the ending to this is perfect. All the arcs and storylines wrap up in a satisfying way. Adonis gets the closure he needs with his father for his arc. Rocky sees his son. The Drago boys are doing alright. It's perfect. Don't make a third one. I'm saying this as a big fan of these first two. Don't make a third one. It's kind of like why I don't want to see a Baby Driver 2, despite that being maybe my favorite film. This was a perfect ending, and I think they should just leave it at that. The movie on the whole isn't perfect though. None of these things that I'm about to talk about really ruin the experience or anything, but they're still worth mentioning. The movie does definitely follow a formula, and while it's a formula that works and does lead to this being such a good time, I do feel like I should point it out. I mean, the film is pretty predictable. You do know where it's going for the most part. Also, the movie almost falls a bit in that Kingsman 2 trap of just being references to the first film that, hey, I'll get, but most people won't, and even I'm not really all that impressed with them. There were quite a few of those at the start, and it was beginning to make me a little nervous, but luckily that kind of disappeared, or they were worked better into the story as we moved along. Also, I feel like this movie kind of walks back some of Adonis' arc from the first film. Like, for most of this film, he's so angry and has his mind clouded, and that works for this movie and makes his arc with him moving past that really satisfying. But some of it, I was like, I feel like we covered this ground already, and it's kind of ignoring some of the maturing he did in that first movie. I guess that's a problem you're probably gonna have with this kind of sequel, and it's not like he's a completely different character. There were just a few points where I was like, I feel like you should have already learned this the first time around. And finally, I really like Michael B. Jordan and Tessa Thompson in this film, and they have really good chemistry, but one or two scenes, I don't know, I wasn't crazy about the performances. These are a few of the emotional moments, and maybe it's in the writing as well, but unlike the scene where they find out their baby is deaf, which I thought was really well done and well acted, during the proposal, and also when they find out Bianca's pregnant, there were a few moments where it got a bit too cheesy, even for a film with, a few cheesy, overdramatic moments. But that's also in the more heroic, awesome comeback parts, where those kinds of moments are warranted, and more fit with the tone of those scenes. In the otherwise pretty realistic relationship parts, I don't know, it might be the writing, but there were a few weaker moments. I do want to stress, most of the relationship stuff, even most of that proposal scene, was good though. Overall, as a huge fan of the first Creed, I can say that Creed 2 is almost up there with it. It does have its flaws, but it gave me pretty much exactly what I wanted. It made me feel those same Creed emotions again, and in a few respects, I think it's better than the first. I'll give it a 9.2 out of 10. Up next is Bumblebee. The thing with this film is, I'd heard this was like an absolutely amazing masterpiece before seeing it, so my expectations were pretty high. And yeah, it's good, it's really good. It's not fantastic though, at least to me. Some people get a bit mad when I talk about Transformers, because I didn't grow up with them, and I don't know any of the lore or the backstory. I've just seen the movies, right? I'm just judging these as movies. So yes, I'm sure for hardcore Transformers fans, some of the stuff in this film was mind-blowing. For me, most of it was a good fun time, and that's mostly it. I mean, it is definitely the best Transformers film. I'll definitely give it that. I really enjoyed the performances, namely Hailee Steinfeld and John Cena. Hailee Steinfeld is just one of my favorite actresses. She's super likable in this, and the whole E.T. Iron Giant kind of relationship she has with Bumblebee is genuinely sweet. And John Cena I liked because he's just over the top and having fun with it, and I don't know, he's charismatic and I enjoyed it. Reminded me a bit of Dwayne Johnson. Everyone else ranges from pretty good to okay. I like the neighbor kind of love interest, and I liked Hailee Steinfeld's arc involving her family and her dad and everything, but the family members themselves, I wasn't crazy about. That being said, it's a Transformers film with human characters you actually like and care about, which is pretty great. Also, I really did enjoy the human stuff, the human Transformer stuff, or the Steinfeld Bumblebee stuff. I know some people want a whole Cybertron Transformers film, that could be cool, but I personally enjoyed those scenes on Earth probably as much as the Cybertron scenes, if not more so in some ways. And I know some people say this is just a ripoff of those films I mentioned before, and yes, it's definitely inspired by them, but I wouldn't say it's just straight up ripping them off. And what can I say? I love those films, it's a good premise, and it's done well here. As far as the Transformers themselves, I stand by that I don't hate those Michael Bay Transformer designs. In some ways at least, I think they're quite cool. But yeah, after seeing this, I do definitely prefer this more, cartoonish look. It's more streamlined and it's simpler, but it's not boring or generic. The Cybertron stuff I mentioned before, everyone else was going crazy about it. I liked it, but I don't think it's like the best thing I've ever seen, or one of the best scenes of the year like some people do. Again, maybe it's the fact that I don't have any Transformers nostalgia, but yeah, it was a really cool action scene, but that's about it for me. I also like Bumblebee as a character, especially when he's this very competent soldier. The memory damaged version is okay as well, but I can understand why they did that. It does work better for that Iron Giant type of story they want to tell. The action in general is quite good, you can see what's going on, and the visual effects are fantastic. Something else this has over the other Transformers films is that it's actually funny. There were moments that actually made me laugh. Again, improvement for this franchise. And there were moments that, didn't make me cry, but I was like, okay, yeah, that's pretty sweet. There's one shot towards the end of this film involving a mirror, which I genuinely loved. Such a perfect moment. As far as the bad stuff, there are some really dumb and really cheesy moments in this. And not cheesy in that kind of over-the-top blockbuster way where it's part of the fun. There's some moments in this that are pretty cringeworthy. And while most of it is pretty funny, some of the jokes don't work. Also, most of it is quite predictable. I feel like I've been saying most of these are quite predictable. I don't want it to seem like that's the only criticism I have with movies, but what do you want me to say? That's how I feel. This does follow a bit of a formula. Overall, Bumblebee's a fun action blockbuster that I don't think is exceptional, but yeah, I'd recommend you see it. It's a good time. I'll give it an 8.4 out of 10. And finally, I want to talk about Bandersnatch, because it's technically a movie, or it's a game, who cares, I liked it and I want to talk about it. Now, I actually haven't watched Black Mirror yet. It's one of those things that's been on my Netflix watch list for ages, and I keep saying I'll watch it, but haven't actually gotten to it yet. I've seen parts of episodes here and there, and I generally know what it is and what it's all about through, pop culture and friends and all that. The reason I watched this, though, was that I was really intrigued by this premise. I know a lot of people read Choose Your Own Adventure books growing up, or that kind of stuff. I never really did, and I don't know if this has ever been done for a film before, at least on this level. But, especially in the unique way you could use Netflix for this kind of thing, I thought this was a great idea. I mean, this is one of the first movies where it actually wouldn't work if it wasn't on Netflix, or at least not as well. And as far as the film itself, I think I got all the endings, and saw the ones I didn't get afterwards on YouTube. I know it's kind of weird to review a film like this, but I played it for quite a while, so I feel like I got most of the experience out of it. And honestly, I loved it. My favorite kind of horror thriller stuff is not so much monsters and demons and jump scares, but more slowly, little weird stuff happening. And then the mystery of what's happening keeps building and building until it just reaches this kind of crazy climax of terrifying but fascinating stuff going on. And that's what this is. And I feel like that's what a lot of Black Mirror is, which is why I really think I should watch it soon. So essentially, no matter how you play this film, mostly in different ways, it's the story of this guy slowly going insane over this game. It's just such a great premise. It's not just a choose-your-own-adventure film, it fully uses the choose-your-own-adventure style in very meta ways. I mean, beyond the fact that it's a choose-your-own-adventure film about someone making a choose-your-own-adventure game based on a choose-your-own-adventure book, the way you interact with the story, like when you can try to explain to the guy that you're watching this on Netflix from the future, not only is it hilarious, but it's just a fascinating and really creative way to tell this kind of story. I also appreciate how the choices are sometimes used for comedic purposes, like the yes or f*** yes moment, or sometimes used for character building or tense moments, or to establish in a unique way what the situation is, like when you only have one option occasionally. I don't know, it was really creative. It even led to some emotional moments, like when you can choose to go with the mom on the train. That almost choked me up a little bit, not gonna lie. The cast is also great, it's really well shot. Even if you took out the interactive aspect of it, it's a well-made film. Gotta say, the only thing I didn't really like about it is the way it kind of forces you to do things sometimes, like when it makes you go back and choose a different choice if you make the wrong one. And yes, I get that sometimes they had to do that for the film to work, and sometimes it's probably some extra commentary on the theme of lack of choice and lack of free will and all that, but there were a few points where I was like, well, why'd you even give me the option then? That seemed kind of pointless. Overall though, I don't think I can give Bandersnatch a rating because it's such a different kind of film experience. If that annoys you, just know it would be, pretty high up. An 8 to a 9, something like that. But point is, I really liked it. I can't imagine the kind of work that goes into making this kind of thing, and I think it's definitely worth checking out. Not only for the novelty of this kind of new film, but also if you're just into this kind of weird, mess with your mind type of stuff. Like I am. Alright, that was my big 2018 movie recap. That took longer than I was expecting. Now finally, here at the end, a few things. Firstly, I'm not going to make a best comic book movie of 2018 video, just because I feel like it'd be really redundant after all the reviews I've made and how much I've talked about these films. But I'll give my ranking of the comic book films that I saw last year here. Here we go. There it is. Also, now that I've seen more films, here's my updated top 10 movies of 2018 list. Just have a look at it. So, those were my thoughts on a bunch of movies from 2018. Do you agree or disagree with my reviews? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to like this video, check out my Instagram and Twitter at BHL_Hudson. Check out this podcast about movies and TV and whatnot I do with a friend of mine. It's called the Poorly Planned Podcast. And subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.